we aired the Josh Harris, Bob Myers press conference yesterday. And
inspiring stuff from the owner again.
Well, it was tough. It was tough for me to listen to it and then have full opinions on it afterwards. So I went home and I watched the whole thing and I thought about it some more. And there's still one Josh Harris thing, and credit to Camera this morning for pointing it out. I wasn't watching it yesterday. I was just listening to it.
Yeah.
Is Josh Harris looking at notes to answer questions is insane. It's insane. It's not insane to look at notes when you go up and you do your initial. If he had to look at his notes to do his initial, statement, whatever, it doesn't matter. Looking at notes is crazy. He looked terrible yesterday. Just, not trying to, look shame him, but he looked terrible. But before we get to the Myers thing, I just want to play this one more thing from Josh Harris because this struck me even more when I listened to it later.
Darryl had said at the trade deadline that the position of ownership was that you'd be willing to go over the luxury tax if the right situation presented itself. What's your view of that? Is that still something that ownership is willing to do in the right situations moving forward? Is staying under the tax line a priority? How do you view that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question because it's been on chatter and it gives me a chance to answer it directly. The front office absolutely has the green light to go into the luxury tax. In fact, we've been in and out of the luxury tax. And so it's not an issue. I mean, it's just not an issue. We're building an arena here. I can tell you that, the amount of dollars you spend on that versus the luxury tax, it's magnitudes more. We built this facility. We've signed a number of max deals. So there's no issue with the luxury tax. And so I'm glad that you asked.
So just don't lie to people. That's a lie. Those things are true that he said. They've spent money on max contracts. They've highly paid coaches, highly paid general managers. All that stuff is true. Absolutely. I've given them credit for that. I've said they've never cheaped out on that. Why, in God's name, would the general manager make moves like cutting Isaiah Joe or whatever right at that moment, or knowing that Morey, I'm sure, knew if he didn't trade Jared McCain, he was going to have to trade Andre Drummond or Kelly Oubre or Quentin Grimes or something to get under the tax. Why else would he make moves like that to get under the tax? Stop lying. Do I believe that the Sixers, if they felt like they had a real shot of winning a championship, to pay the tax? I think they would. But that is a different conversation that it's not an issue. It's obviously an issue. Or
was this year.
Yes, and it has been in previous years. Yeah. It absolutely has been in previous years.
Let me ask you this. Has it been, and I don't know because I don't – that's in the weeds for me.
Yeah.
But in years that you think they could have legitimately contended, do you think they made moves to stay under the luxury tax?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Not every time.
Okay.
They've paid the tax before.
Okay.
They've paid the tax before. And that's why I'm so mad about the lying because, I think 25 NBA teams ducked the tax this year. It's not like he's the only team that did it. No, yeah. Absolutely. There are now the Celtics did too.
Okay.
I mean, the Celtics didn't pay the tax either. I mean, it's not now. Last year they did when they felt like they really had a chance to win a championship. That's why I just want them to say, if we feel like we're in the right position, then yes, we'll pay the tax.
Right.
That's different than saying it's not an issue because that is just it's making us feel like we're crazy. It makes the moves that were made to obviously get under the tax look insane, So just don't lie to us. That's a stop lying, and that is you don't need to lie. And again, everything he said was true. They're spending money to build an arena. They spent money to build the facility. All those things, but that was a lie.
Yeah, it felt like his whole sort of motive there was to assure people they're not trying to be cheap to win.
Yes.
Yeah.
But sometimes they are.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and you know what? I would have. Now I don't know if fans would have accepted it. I don't think at any point this year this team had a chance of winning a championship.
Oh,
None.
I agree with that. Yeah.
None. So if I was Daryl Morey and I know that they only want to pay the tax if we think we're going to win a championship, then I would go for my own job security, might be the best thing to stay under the tax. That sort of stuff. But that is different than saying it's not an issue. They always have the green light. He's just not being truthful, and that is what it just drives me crazy because it makes everyone I hate using this phrase. It is gaslighting people. It's saying something they know to be true and then making them sound crazy when they say it. Just do not BS us. And that is, it is clear that Harris does not know all he knows. The entire point of firing Daryl Morey and the entire point of him saying those things is getting the pressure off of them and on someone else. Just fire somebody, everybody will move on. There was something else that Bob Myers said. We're going to have to do it in the next segment because I think it's less about ranting and raving like that was and more about interesting about who is actually running the team. So I mentioned there was one more thing from the hour-long press conference. There was a lot of Bob Myers saying nothing. He is very skilled at talking a lot and saying nothing.
He sounded passionate, though.
He did. He was an agent, so he's good at talking. You know, has been on TV, good at talking. But I think this quote, and I think a lot of people locked on to not only this quote but other things he said that were like it, resonated with me and gave me some thoughts. So here's what he had to say.
What you envision your role here being with the Sixers specifically after this hire is made. Josh mentioned the idea of you and Nick and this hire working together and how that differs from what it has been since you started working with HBSC.
Yeah, I view taking the next few weeks, not sure how long it'll be, to identify a day-to-day leader that'll have a lot of authority here, which they should. What they're going to get and our fans are going to get is them plus me. I won't be on the day-to-day level, but on the high-level decision-making, which is being here at the draft, being here leading up to the trade deadline, being available for free agency discussions, free agency meetings, things like that. I'm going to be involved at that level. And I can tell you that I imagine, and this isn't, not saying this lightly, I'll be communicating with that person daily, if not 5 out of 7 days a week. You know why? And I don't view that as a job because I want to. I want to hire somebody that I can work with. I want to hire somebody that Josh can work with. And most importantly, I want to win.
So he says not day to day, and then he says he'll talk to him 5 days a week, which is day to day.
Yeah.
So, okay. So people were happy about that. I know Giulio was happy. You were happy. You're like, I want Bob Myers. I want Bob Myers. I understand that.
Yep.
Here is my issue, and then the two ways I see what he said, the two things it could mean. My issue is that I don't think the biggest issue with this ownership is paying the tax. I don't think it is Josh Harris not speaking well at press conferences. I don't think it's a money thing. I think that the biggest issue with this ownership is that from the minute they bought the team in 2011, they have had a very hard time committing to a leadership structure that they stick with, that is clear about who has say and who does what. And you forget sometimes that, like, they own the team before Hinkie. And here are the messy organizational and leadership structures they've had. First, Rod Thorne, Doug Collins, Tony DeLeo, Adam Aaron all thought they ran the team at the same time. And that was their first leadership. Okay, you give them the okay, whatever. They fire them, they hire Hinkie. Very quickly, Scott O'Neill also thinks he has the team, also runs the team, also has ownership's ear while Hinkie is there, was part of getting Hinkie fired, and that only lasted 2 years. They had an opportunity to stand behind what they did. They decided to pass. They then let Jerry Colangelo come in and hire his son. That doesn't last very long. Okay, he gets fired. What happens after that? Well, for about 3 months, it was a minority owner named David Heller and Brett Brown. They were running the team. Two people. Who has final say? Nobody knows. So then they have to hire a president of basketball operations, a general manager. So instead of just hiring one, there were like 3 or 4 internal candidates. They make Elton Brand the face of it, but every single person in that front office was given a direct line to Josh Harris. So we had Alex Rucker, who worked for Brian Colangelo, who was too much involved in the decisions. So when we look at the Elton Brand era, it was really 3 or 4 people making decisions at once. That was a disaster. Then they fire those guys. They put Elton Brand in control for all of a week and a half. They hire Doc Rivers, who they give personnel say to, and then they hire Daryl Morey after Doc Rivers. So once again, we have 2 people, who think they have say of who is going to be running the basketball team. And then we have Morey for, 3 years with Nurse, and then he gets fired. So then that brings us to this moment. So if they wanted Bob Myers to run the basketball team, then he should run the basketball team. But when they do it this way, if you want to go out and hire somebody great, I can promise you, anybody with any experience, like true experience doing this, doesn't want to come into a situation where Bob Myers is checking in with them every day, and they know that ultimately Bob Myers is not going to get fired. The success or failure of the team is going to go on this person.
Yep.
And if they think this guy is going to be meddling all the time, it makes it harder to hire someone. A situation
with experience.
With experience.
Yep.
Yes, absolutely, with experience. So you're cutting down your hiring pool to people who are less experienced. And the other thing is that on top of it, you already have a challenging situation from a personnel perspective. With the Embiid contract, the Paul George contract, you're already keeping the head coach in there, which is already going to make people more shaky. Mm-hmm. So now you have this structure where somebody coming in, again, if you want to hire Bob Myers, you could go back and forth on how good Bob Myers is. I think people would do that. He has 4 championships. Mm-hmm. It would be very hard to argue hiring Bob Myers. So then that gets to the final thing. I'm sorry, just leading up to this final thing.
Ahead. Yep.
One of 2 things happened yesterday. One, we either have, once again, a messy leadership structure where someone is going to come in and be the president of basketball operations, but somebody else is going to have the owner's ear on what to do or not do, which is a mess. Or we have, which I think, the second thing, which I think might be a slightly more likely, is that Josh Harris wants Bob Myers to do it. Bob Myers doesn't actually want to do it. He tried to hire Bob Myers once before when Bob Myers worked for the Warriors. Bob Myers didn't want to do it, didn't leave. He wants Bob Myers to do it, but Bob Myers wants to keep his job, his high-paid, sort of cushy job. Mm-hmm. So what he tells Josh is, and what he shows on the dais yesterday is, I'm not going to do the job, but don't worry. I'll be right there with this person all the time. So we have somebody 1 foot in, 1 foot out, not sure if he's doing a show for us or he's doing a show for the owner or who he's doing a show for. And I think my frustration here is, again, if it's going to be Bob Myers, then it should just be Bob Myers. And if it's not going to be Bob Myers, then whoever they hire should be the real president of basketball operations, so we can go out and get the best and the brightest and the most exciting person there. And it is just indicative of what I believe is the biggest problem with ownership, is that just hire somebody and let them do their job.
Yeah.
Too
many cooks in the kitchen
is
what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah.
Stop being afraid to tell somebody no, or stop. If you heard no from Bob Myers, if Bob Myers said, I don't want to do the job, then Bob Myers doesn't want to do the job. And
move him out of the way.
Yes, and let him do that job where he's in charge. Because remember, we're supposed to think that he's involved day to day. He's got the Commanders that he is supposed to be in charge of. Mm-hmm. He's got the Devils that he's supposed to be in charge of. He's got their soccer team that he's supposed to be in charge of.
Yeah.
Dude, that's too much to be worrying about day to day on the Sixers and making a phone call every day with the Sixers.
Listen, I think you're right, especially from the sense of creating an atmosphere of confusion and chaos when things go awry.
Yes.
It's one thing if there's no tough decisions to make and everybody can just get along to go along to get along. But when there are tough decisions that have to be made and somebody's going to have to answer for those decisions that have to be made and explain those things, somebody has to be the face of that and willing to step out there. Seems to me that Bob Myers doesn't want that part of the responsibility of being out there and being held accountable for it. But he did way too much of, I want to win, I yesterday, for people not to come away thinking, oh, he's running the team.
Yes, and I think what is, people think, and I'm just guessing, but I think I'm pretty good at reading people. People are thinking, oh, he really, really wants it. He just doesn't want to say it.
Yeah,
I don't think
that's kind of where I'm coming. That's okay. That's kind of what my thought process is.
I don't think he wants it at all. I think he wants Josh Harris to believe he wants it.
Okay.
And because I think Josh Harris wants him to do the job. But if he wanted to do the job, do you think Josh Harris would have any problem?
Well, I have no problem with
giving Bob
him
Myers
the job.
president of basketball operations.
Yes.
In a second, he would do it.
It would actually make Josh Harris look competent doing that.
Look at what I just hired.
Yes.
I hired, and look, I got this guy who had this bigger job that was above. I got him to take this job, a 4-time champion. People, you think Bob Myers hasn't had an opportunity to be president of basketball operations somewhere?
Right.
Of course he has. If he wanted that job, he would have just taken it. And that is the thing that frustrates me. It's not an anti-Bob Myers thing. I don't. It's not a I love Daryl. I love Daryl. I like Daryl. I think Daryl's great at his job.
Yeah.
But also, I would not have a problem with Bob Myers being the president of basketball operations. But you have to do it. And I don't want this thing where the one guy whose ass is going to be on the line making these decisions have somebody else. Everyone has someone to answer to.
Sure.
But that person should be the owner. You shouldn't have to go through somebody else.
Well, you know, Joshua Harris shows up for just things like this and
Yes.
the occasional playoff game. I think Bob Myers, and correct me if you disagree, I think Bob Myers will now become more of a face with the Sixers.
Yes. And just think about it, like, if you're the person they hire, I'm sorry, at the press conferences where we sign a free agent, I want to be the person that talks with the owner.
Right.
I don't want Bob Myers to be the person that talks, because what's going to happen is I've been through these situations personally, because what happens is when something good happens, Bob
getting the
Myers
credit,
gets
yeah.
the shine.
Yep.
His quote makes the press release, all that. When something bad happens, it's the other
the other
person.
guy, yes, that person.
It just makes it harder to hire. It makes it harder to hire.
I agree.
Unless you're getting a first-time candidate that's never done it before.
And that's where I think he's going.
Yes,
that's why I keep going back to Iggy.
Well, yeah. I mean, can I tell you, though, Iggy is so inexperienced that you like.
Right, yeah, I'm with you.
Bob
Yeah.
Myers really has
He would
to
have
be
to do
involved.
more. He would have to do more work if Iguodala is there.
Well, and the truth is that the name that has been brought up a bunch of times is Vince Rosman, who worked for the Sixers
Okay.
for years, who's running the draft for the Thunder right now. But I want that guy to have I want him to be able to do the job. Because the other problem is, if people think that they don't like your answer, but somebody above you might give you a different answer, they don't care about your answer. They don't respect it. They just go to the other guy.
Yeah.
I think this, if that was what it was, then the Bob Myers role has to be less upfront and more silent, and we should know what's going on.
Right.
We should know what's going on, you know?
Yeah.
Or because what we're looking at is like, this can't be a Dave Dombrowski and Preston Mattingly situation, because Preston Mattingly doesn't get any blame when something goes
Nope.
wrong, because he's not
it's all
making
Dave
those
Dombrowski,
decisions.
yeah.
All
Well,
right.
here's the thing. How much of that do you think was Joshua Harris knowing he had to put someone out there, Bob Myers, obviously his best candidate, that would exude some sort of confidence
For sure.
from this fan base? Like, you have to put somebody out there that we'll believe what the hell they're saying and talking about.
100%. And if he disappears after this hire gets made and we don't see him at press conferences and we don't hear what he has to say besides after the hire, fine. That is absolutely fine. Go out there, say
gonna be
you're
something
going
to watch, though.
Yes, but it's something to watch.
Yeah, it's
just
definitely
because of
something
the
to watch.
history of the organization.
Yeah.
And he was like introducing himself to members of the media yesterday.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, what's your name?
Yeah.
What's your? Oh,
Yes.
what's your? Oh, Adam.
Yeah.
And credit to Sixers Adam Aronson for asking that question that got that response as well.